Welcome everybody to this webinar on the CSA Z1011, the Work Disability Management System Standard. This is our sixth webinar, and today's session we're focusing on implications for persons with disabilities. My name is Emile Tompa, and I'm one of your moderators. Thank you very much for attending. Happy New Year, everybody. I hope everyone is keeping safe and well and managing with this current lockdown. I'm hoping we're almost past it now that the vaccine is coming on board across Canada. So bear with us. Hopefully we'll get a better sense of normalcy going forward in this year. So thank you very much for joining us. Okay, this is just an overview of our session today. We're going to start off with an introduction to the CSA group and standards development process, which will be given by Lina Lopez from the CSA group. Then I'm going to join in with a background statistics on the issues at hand related to persons with disabilities in the world of work and give a high-level summary of the standard with a focus on recruitment, hiring, and onboarding of persons with disabilities. And then we'll get into the core part of our panelist discussion, which is sort of a fireside chat format that we're taking, where we'll have a number of questions for them. And at this time, we'll also take questions from the audience. So if you'll type in your questions into the chat box, Lina will be monitoring that chat box and will insert some of your questions into that fireside chat with the panelists. So this is the group who are presenting today. Myself, Emile Tompa. I'm the director of the Center for Research on Work Disability Policy. Lina Lopez is the project manager for the CSA group and was the manager for the standard that we're talking about today, the Z1011. We have Joseph Giulione. He's the director with WDMS. Pam Lahey, who's a research advisor with Employment and Social Development Canada, and Tom McKenna, who is a Canadian Union of Public Employees worker. And all three of them were part of the technical group that developed this standard. So Lina, will you start off with an overview of the standard development process, please?
Welcome. I'm going to provide you with an overview on the standards development process. At CSA Group, we're a non-governmental, non-for-profit organization from the standard side, but CSA Group does have two divisions. So you have the commercial subsidiary side and also the standards development organization side. I'm going to be focusing in on the standards development organization, the non-for-profit side. So with the standards development organization, on our end, we look at 12 focus areas. The standard we're going to be speaking on is Z1011, and that falls in one of our focus areas, and that's occupational health and safety. I just want to provide you with an overview of the other 11 focus areas of CSA. So with the standard Z1011, this falls under the suite of the management system standards. So it's one of many in the management system, and it also weaves into the worker wellness area that we have. I wanted what you may be seeing in front of you, if you're able to see the screen, is the CSA development process, the cycle. So with any standard, before it becomes a standard, it starts off as a request from either an individual or an organization. CSA then provides a notification to the larger body, the Canadian Standards of Canada. And then when it's determined that there's no other standard in that particular area, we'll move forward with a committee, a group of committee members, and they're all volunteer members from different stakeholder perspectives that come together for a series of meetings to create a draft standard. That draft standard then, looking at the cycle, it then goes to public review, and a notification is sent out to interested stakeholders, and we're looking for input from the public on that draft standard. Revisions are made, and then as we work through them with the editorial team, it then becomes a living standard, which then stays in place for 5 years. So with that, and if you can hit it one more time or press, it stays in the maintenance stage for 5 years. So this standard that we're going to be talking about is in that phase of maintenance. So this is where we also are looking for feedback from the public. If you have any questions about it in regards to interpretation to a clause, please let me know, and then I can always send it back to the committee for input. So often the question we get is, are all standards mandatory? And the question is no, they're not mandatory unless they are in regulation. And then, the big question is often is, well, why do organizations and governments adopt a standard? a CSA standard. And so, looking at the screen here, there could be numerous reasons. The great thing about the standard, it's developed through consensus through various stakeholders of leading practices. And so that is often an easy solution for an organization or a government to move to look for as guidance. And it's also a less expensive approach. And how to get involved. So the volunteer individuals that are part of a standard are participants that have just applied through our system. So if you are interested in to get involved in this standard or other standards, you're welcome to send me an email. There's also on one of our community page that you can sign up for, looking at the current memberships that are open for participation. There's also direct input that you can get involved when a standard is at public review. And you're also welcome to join the CSA communities, where you can just follow along on threads of conversation or start a conversation if you have a question to ask. And that is everything. So if you have any questions, I can be reached by email. I'm going to also be monitoring the chat function here, so feel free to drop a question, and happy to answer any questions. And now I think it's Emile that you're presenting next.
Yes. Okay, great. Thanks, Lina. Okay, so on this slide, I just have an overview of the people who are involved in this the standard development process. Myself, I was the chair of the technical committee. We had two vice chairs, Aminias Danny and David Brown. The CSA managers that were overseeing the development process with the CSA group were Lina and David Shanahan. And there was about 26 voting members and several non-voting members. That group reflects an extensive group of expertise from various stakeholder groups. They included employer representatives from labor and union, injured workers and disabled worker representatives, health and safety professionals, return to work specialists, experts in work disability prevention, work disability insurance and program providers, as well as academics and researchers. So quite a roster of expertise and experience amongst the technical group. This is the list of technical committee members. I won't go through them all. There was quite a few of them, 26 in total. I've highlighted the three people we have with us today for the Fireside Chat. Joseph Giulione, Pam Lahey, and Tom McKenna. So they are amongst the technical committee members representing various stakeholder perspectives in the development process. Okay, so just to set the framework of the issues that this standard tries to address in relation to persons with disabilities, I have some statistics here taken from various sources. Persons with disabilities, as you may know, have disproportionately poorer employment outcomes, even when they do have appropriate qualifications and are work ready. They're less likely to be employed compared to people without disabilities, 59% versus 80%, and this is data from Statistics Canada. Type and severity of disability can also bear on employment outcomes. So persons with mild disabilities have better employment outcomes than persons with severe disabilities. Persons with disabilities also earn less than those without disabilities. For example, men with disabilities who have a university education earn less than men without disabilities that have a university education. And that is like 69,000 compared to say 93,000 on average. So quite a disparate employment outcome for men with disabilities here who have a university education. And for those who are employed, persons living with chronic or episodic health conditions are more likely to report productivity losses associated with absenteeism and presenteeism. And overall, we just find that employers have much learning to do to better tap into the talent of persons with disabilities. And that's what the Work Disability Management System Standard is trying to address. It provides a framework to advance an organization's abilities to accommodate the needs of workers with disabilities. The purpose of the standard is to provide a consensus-based framework for the management of work disability at the organizational level. It's very broadly scoped. It considers both physical and mental health needs of workers. And it also provides, and this is emphasized in red because this is at the gist of what we're talking about today, it also provides guidance for recruitment, hiring, and onboarding of workers with disabilities. The standard also provides some supporting materials in the form of annexes to the standard, and one of those annexes includes implementation tips, so helping organizations implement the standard if they haven't implemented it already. Okay, so the standard takes what we describe as a systems approach. Traditionally, the approach taken with work disability management at the organizational level was to assign it to a particular person, a work disability manager, usually someone who sat within maybe human resources department or within an occupational health and safety department. And in some organizations even farm out disability management functions to outside providers. Invariably, then they are taking a very reactive approach, particularly to performance measurement, using indicators such as absence days. Once they have data on how many people have been absent in a particular period of time, and address them in a kind of reactive way. Whereas in this standard, we take a systems approach, which is meant to be proactive and considers the roles and responsibilities across the organization. It takes into consideration the inputs, process, outputs, and feedback. And the evaluation and improvement is done on a continual basis. Okay, so what's a management system? Now, a lot of people ask that because maybe it's a terminology that's new to some people. It's a formalized framework of policies, processes, and procedures used by an organization to meet its objectives. That's a very generic construct because it's used across a number of activities within an organization. It's a documented and tested step-by-step method aimed to ensure smooth functioning through standard practices. And audits are a vital part of that management systems approach because on a regular basis, you're supposed to review whether you've achieved certain targets. And if you haven't, you kind of consider how you can realign what you're doing to reach those targets. And ideally, organizations have these types of frameworks in place for all their core activities. So this management system standard is one of many that are available through the CSA group. The systems approach to work disability management really ensures that there's clarity and consistency, integration with all of the other organizational activities. The standard promotes a proactive approach, as I've mentioned. So it's meant to address health needs of workers before they become disabling. So we sometimes use the vocabulary of work disability prevention to frame that notion of, health conditions don't necessarily have to be disabling if they're appropriately accommodated. Okay, so this is a generic management systems model. I'm just going to speak to the different components of it. So if you can click just one next slide. Okay, so the policy is at the front end. So policies play a really fundamental role in setting clear directions for the organization to follow. So that's at the front end. Next slide. So management structures have to be in place, obviously, to deliver on those policies. Next slide. Okay, it requires planning and a systematic approach to implementing those policies. Next slide. And it emphasizes, as I've mentioned, measurement and performance against targets to identify the areas that need improvement. Next slide. Okay, and then review and learning from experiences are really fundamental to that continuous improvement process. So you really need to think about, have we achieved targets? If we haven't, what do we need to do differently? And if you have achieved those targets, then you think about what can we do next to improve on the work disability management system. Okay, so the continual improvement process is at the heart of this standard, and it's the heart of many standards. It's often described as plan, do, check, act, and the standard chapters are actually organized around this framework of plan, do, check, act. And as an example, say for a review process, one of the things you might do at the front end is you consider, do current recruitment, hiring, and onboarding practices provide opportunities for persons with different types of disabilities to access employment opportunities within the organization. If you're looking at that issue and thinking about how can we do a better job, you'll want to think about what policies and procedures and roles and responsibilities and resources need to be in place to ensure inclusive employment practices. And then you go through that plan, do, check, act to make sure you reach the targets you've set for yourself in that cycle. Okay, the framework is really broad to facilitate integration with other organizational activities. It's designed to be integratable with other standards. So if you've picked up the CSA's Z1003, the Psychological Health and Safety in the Workplace, or the ISO 9001 Quality Management, or the Occupational Health and Safety Management System Standard, the CSA Z45001, all of those standards fit in with this standard. So they're really meant to be dovetail with each other. As I mentioned, it takes a systems approach, organizational-wide kind of approach to dealing with disability management issues. And it really emphasizes joint management and integration with all the other organizational activities. So we're trying to use common language and terminology wherever possible, drawing on the vocabulary from other standards. So it's a familiar groundwork for anybody who's already implemented some of these other standards. And as Lina mentioned, this standard is voluntary. It's intended to serve as guidance that specifies best practices above the minimum requirements of the law. Okay, there's 6 principles that are at the foundation of these standards. I've highlighted 3 that really speak to the issue of workers with disability. So the first principle is an evidence-informed, data-driven approach that is strategic in nature to ensure sound policies and processes. So data is really critical. It has to be evidence-based kind of approaches to decision-making. The second one is a focus on inclusion and accessibility to promote engagement and belonging. So really want to be an inclusive workplace. It takes a worker-centered approach, trying to be supportive and contextualized in dealing with cases on a case-by-case basis. So customized approach for workers' health needs. The fourth one is promoting accommodation and early return to work that considers the essential duties of the worker's role within the organization. The fifth one is joint responsibility between the organizational management, the workforce, and worker representatives where applicable. And then the sixth one is legal compliance is applicable within the specific jurisdiction of the organization. Okay, so one of the things we frame at the front end of the standard in the opening chapters is the notion of the employment life cycle. So we frame disability management as a continuum in terms of addressing the workers' health needs over the time that they're with the organization. So we're taking into consideration the workers' health needs over the working life course. And I won't go into the details of this table, but we've tried to frame some of the issues around these 4 aspects of a person's working life cycle. So at the front end, there's recruitment and hiring. And so a number of considerations that an organization to take into consideration when they're thinking about recruitment and hiring. On the onboarding process, a number of considerations. Continuity and advancements, once the person is on board and working with the organization, thinking about their career advancement within the organization. And at some point that worker may be exiting to retirement or some other employment opportunity. So thinking about how you help with those kinds of transitions as well. Okay, the standards, I've emphasized this point already, but it's meant to be generalizable. It's a generic document that's appropriate for any organization operating in Canada. It's meant to fit any size, whether it's private or public sector, whether it's for-profit or not-for-profit, whether it's operating in any sector within the Canadian economy. It considers both physical and mental health needs of workers. And it really describes the what, about what you need to achieve to be compliant with or fulfill the kind of expectations that a formalized work disability management system standard would have. The how, the implementation, is a separate aspect of the standard. And there are some implementation tips to help with that how, particularly an annex that provides some tips to help organizations get started with adopting or advancing the standard within their organization. Okay, so this is an overview of the content of the standard and the annexes. You see the core sections 4, 5, 6, and 7. I'll speak to them in a little bit more detail in the subsequent slides. And then there's the list of the informative annexes that are listed on the right side there. Okay, so here are some details about the core sections of the standard. And we'll give some details about each of these in these next few slides. Next slide, please. Okay, so at the front end, the work disability management system standards really sets the stage for getting organizations started down the path of adopting or advancing these standards within their organization. So this section really emphasizes involvement of all the key stakeholders, which is really essential. Everybody plays a role in the work disability management system standard. The senior management plays a role, obviously, their commitment, their sense of putting this as a priority, providing resources for the organization to go forward with developing this standard. Frontline managers and supervisors obviously play a critical role. Internal subject matter experts, disability management specialists, healthcare professionals, and importantly, workers and their representatives such as unions really play a critical role. Okay, so the next stage is planning. This section emphasizes the need for the organization to understand its strengths and identify areas where they have room for improvement. So they need to develop a vision for the future. You want to consider the organization's unique situation and its capacities as well. And you want to engage all key stakeholders in this planning process. The implementation section. So this section really emphasizes the importance of a well thought out plan to achieve success. It really emphasizes the proactive approach and culture change. So subsections include accommodating workers with disabilities in the recruitment, hiring, and onboarding process. It notes the importance of promoting inclusive and non-judgmental environment towards workers with disabilities. And it really notes the importance of ensuring workers are not reluctant to reaching out for assistance when they need help for, for terms of getting appropriate accommodations for their health needs. So culture change is really critical for workers to feel comfortable to do that. And then the last section emphasizes the importance of performance and measurement. It really emphasizes the need to review, do audits, and think about that continual improvement process. Particularly in this case, we're speaking about recruitment, hiring, and onboarding, as well as accommodation of workers with disabilities. It emphasizes both qualitative and quantitative data in that evaluation process. So it's not just counting absence days or other things like that that are part of your maybe administrative data that's available through their absence management system. It's really thinking more broadly about understanding how things are working, where they're working well, where they're not working well, using whatever data resources you can have in-house, as well as developing new ones possibly to help better understand, where there's room for improvement. And it really notes the importance of addressing deficiencies and identifying them on a timely basis so you can address them. Okay, so now we're going to get into our fireside chat, and we have 3 panelists who are all part of the technical committee who developed the standard. We have Joseph Giulione, Director of L'Image, Pam Lahey, who is a research advisor with Employment and Social Development Canada, and Tom McKenna, who is with the Canadian Union of Public Employees. And I'll ask each of them to turn on their videos and their audio and maybe give us, for each of them, starting off with Joseph, then Pam and Tom, a bio of who you are. Give a little bit more detail than I've given right now.
Oh, thanks, Emile. Thank you for having me, and Happy New Year to all. So my name is Joseph Giulione. I'm the director of L'Image, which is a support and employment service here in Montreal. We work with people living with mental illness. Basically, I've been involved in L'Image for 36 years, so I've witnessed the evolution of the integration of people with disabilities into the workforce. And I could say that there's a lot of work that has been done to put people at a level where they are being hired, but the difficulties remain, and the standard hopefully will help change or shift that paradigm. Sorry, I'm using a French word. So that's it for me.
Hi, it's Pam Lahey here. As Emile introduced me, I'm a research advisor within the Social Research Division, largely within Employment and Social Development Canada. I have been working on work disability policy issues for 20 plus years. In my role as research advisor, I work on disability and accessibility issues for people with disabilities as it relates to other departments' research needs. Thank you. That's all for me.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tom McKenna. I'm a staff representative with the Canadian Union of Public Employees. My job there for the last 22 years has been workers' compensation claims and appeals, regulation review, policy review, and occupational health and safety. And given the current pandemic and what we might be seeing as long-term sequelae related to people who have had or will get COVID-19, I think this standard is very timely.
Thanks, Tom, Pam, and Joseph. So can we have the next slide, please? Okay, so we have some questions here for the panelists. And also, I'll just remind the audience that you can send in your questions through the chat box. And as you do that, Lina will be monitoring them and will insert them into the conversation wherever there's an opportunity to. So our first set of questions here are, I'm going to start off with Joseph. It's on recruitment, hiring, and onboarding. I was going to start off with Pam, actually. So recruitment, hiring, and onboarding. So what are some of the key challenges that organizations have with recruitment, hiring, and onboarding of persons with disabilities? Are there contexts that are particularly challenging? And how might organizations use these standards to help overcome some of these challenges through their management system? So Pam, do you want to start off for us?
Sure. So the answer could take a day. So I will try to be very succinct. In that the 3 key challenges would be that organizations don't know where to find people with disabilities. They're not connected to providers that offer employment services to people with disabilities, for example. So it's where do they go to hire people with disabilities? I don't think it's necessarily a willingness to ignore hiring, just an inability to source out people with disabilities. And another issue is that that they don't know how to accommodate those people with disabilities. They haven't had to do it, or they've had no formal training in it. And so they really rely upon the employer to, the employee to come to them to tell them what their accommodation needs are. So that's the second challenge. And the last challenge, and it takes me into what are the contexts that are particularly challenging, is that there is unconscious bias in that even if organizations have a retainment goal or a recruitment and retainment goal, and they want to hire people with disabilities, there's this belief system that people with disabilities will cost more, or they can't fire them once they hire them. There'll be performance issues. So there's a lot of unconscious bias around the competencies of people with disabilities, and that is really hard to overcome. And that doesn't happen in one night. It requires cultural change, and it requires all the stakeholders working together on behalf of the person with disability to prevent work disabilities. So that's a really quick summary of the challenges and the organizations how the organization, can help overcome those challenges, as I mentioned. So I'm happy to have both Joseph and Tom join in and tell me if they agree or if there's something else that they think should happen.
I imagine Joseph may have a lot to say in this area.
Actually, thanks. Thanks for the opening. I find it particular when we're talking about employers don't know what resources are available, where you can find people with disabilities, workers with disabilities and all. But what always amazes me about that is that supported employment services for people with disabilities have existed for over 40 years. So we've always, and we're publicly funded. So in a sense, and it's funny because Pamela just touches on this, but just before Christmas, we had a panel here in Quebec, and because, to address the whole manpower issue and manpower needs. And the employers were unanimous in saying, we don't know what's out there. We don't know what services are available. We don't know who to turn to get help. And it wasn't just about people with disabilities. It was for the general work population. And it's interesting because all these services are available. They're available through the federal and provincial governments. They're available through supported groups like ours. They're available through different services, rehabilitation services and whatnot. And it comes down to what's wrong? How come the communication isn't there? How could you insist on not knowing how could you not know what's there when it's all around you? It's just like, is it because you're blind to it? Or is it because you just never considered it, so it's not something that is a priority, or you don't have time? And how could we be more visible than we already are?
Yeah, I agree, Joseph. I think time, to pick up on one of those questions, that time is a big factor, especially for small businesses that are busy running the operations of their business. How do they have the time then to even consider hiring an employee that can't hit the ground running, so to speak, and that would need a little bit more support in order to be as productive as their other employees, or even just to be at 100% as soon as they start, and to be able to produce immediately. And so I think having a bridge between supported employment and employment itself would be really helpful. We have that in job developers, but I think especially in times of COVID, that they've taken a hit, and that it's really hard for job developers to do their job right now. And what will that look like in the coming year or 2 years?
Hi, it's McKenna here. Building on that, I think a problem that we have right now is there's such a need to get through the workday, and there's so many challenges for organizations that it's difficult to look at it from a worker-centered case-by-case approach. when really, when you're looking at disability in the workplace, whether it's perceived disability or disability as we traditionally know it, it has to be worker-centered. It has to be case by case to make it work. And we should use the biopsychosocial approach. For more information on this, if you look at page 8 of Z1011, the standard on 0.3, challenges and opportunities, it goes into that in some detail. I think whether you're a large organization or a small organization, one of the key challenges is, well, do we just go through this mechanically and get through it? Or do we do it so it's durable, it's long-term, and it truly is a worker-centered approach?
I would agree with you, Tom. It does take a worker-centered approach to get somebody on board and to keep them in employment and to assist them through the employment life cycle. It's the, how do we do that? And there is an implementation guide in the standard, and that's helpful. There are also a number of different appendices, including how do you accommodate workers. It really is, though, not just an implementation of how to, but it's will, and it's considering the environment that we're in, how do we make that happen? And Joseph, I wonder, you said that supported employment programs have been around for 40 years, and they haven't always been as visible as they are, though, lately, certainly within the last few years. And I wonder if you have any suggestions for how we can, create a worker-centered approach to hiring and recruitment and hiring and the entire employment life cycle.
Actually, I think that, how could I say this? I think that employment services have to shoulder part of the blame, because some of them, look, when you're dealing with employers, it's important for everybody to have a sort of a vocabulary where employees understand what we're talking about. And I think one of the errors that we make is we used to talk about people with disabilities who want to work. The evolution for the past few years has been, we're talking about workers with a disability, emphasis on workers. And when you're talking to employers, I think that that talking about disability first, the accent is put on what the person can do. And when you're talking about the worker first, now you're talking about what the person, look, the reason why we're more and more present now is because lack of manpower makes it that employers are starting to turn to what they would consider the last resort. And the last resort is people with a disability, sadly. And what it is that they're discovering that these people can work. We still have that 3 category of employer. We have, I bought in and I'm willing to do what has to be done, and I'll invest the time, the energy, because I know that the medium and long-term return on my investment is gonna solve my employment problems. You have that second category of employer who is, I really like to, but, and then they come back with the biases where it's going to cost more in insurance, it's going to cost this. And so they just have to be reassured and informed and know that there's people that could support them to identify accommodations, whatever. And then you have that third category where it's, listen, I think it's a really good idea, but I'll never hire a person with disabilities because there's no way he'll be able to work here. He'll be a risk, and he'll be this and he'll be that. Now, I think that most programs, the people that have bought in are always the ones that we're focusing on. I think that if we had to make a change, we have to look at how could we get those employers that it's a categorical norm? No, how could we make them buy in so that they become maybes? And from there, I think that that shift, that cultural shift that you were talking about, Pamela, I think that's where it's going to start. It's got to start with an opening, as employers want, and they'll start seeing their employees as individuals and the individual needs. Because look, people with disabilities some of them need accommodations, most of them don't. But if you hire someone who's been at home for 5 years, and he comes into, or she comes into work for you for the first few days, well, they're going to need a transition period. Employers that are expecting people to that come in and be productive from the start, well, that person is, especially with the manpower shortage, they're no longer available, or if they are, they're in transition. employers got to get used to, okay, how am I going to change my environment to accommodate the most employees possible so that I could maintain some type of production level. And why I think the investment of time, and you're right, Pamela, people don't have time anymore, but the investment of time is going to be a solution to your problem, or else it's just a never ending story. You're going to hire people, they're going to leave, and you're going to hire more people and they're going to leave. So if you're not taking the time, what's coming out of it? You're just having that, you know, that policy where at one point you're not going to become productive and you're not going to be competitive, and you're, you know, and so it's like employers have to see that. And some of them are buying in, much too many aren't buying in, and even within the structure, you know, we get calls. It's like, it's funny. I got a guy who called me and says, "Listen, I'd like to hire someone who's deaf." And I said, "Well, why would you want? You know, I mean, what are you looking for?" And he's telling me what he leads, and I said, "Well, I have someone who could do that. He's not deaf, but I have someone who can do that." But they'd hire someone with a disability, but they want to choose which disability, and they want to choose, you know, it's like, imagine doing that with imagine calling an employment service and say, "Well, listen, I'd like to hire a 6-year-old Italian man who's balding," which is me. So don't call in, right? Imagine if you put that in your job ad, and what type of reaction would you get?
Yeah, the Build a Worker program, you know, like you're building a bear at one of those factories or one of those, you know, retail shops, it seems to be an acceptable thing if you're looking at people with disabilities. And I think that to be equitable, you need to treat all workers the same. So, or give them the equal opportunities. Let's assume though that all workers, that's not an issue, and all workers with disabilities who want the position that they're hiring, that they're applying for, get it. What happens then when there's an issue or a condition flares up, say mental illness, because we know that's episodic. Let's suppose that they come into employment and 4 months, 5 months, 6 months down the road, they have a bad episode and they need a break. What I've heard happen, and what we know happens from the evidence, is that managers, instead of having a system approach like we advocate in the standard, have a traditional approach, and they haul in the unions as opposed to going to the worker and discussing what their needs are. And that makes then a worker look like they're having a performance issue as opposed to a mental health issue. And it sets up a really adversarial role for the worker, and it's not conducive to accommodating. And I wonder then, Tom, because you work at a union, how many complaints you receive that are disability based, and how you manage that issue?
Thank you for the question. I see this very frequently, especially with respect to workers returning from workers' compensation claims. Many workers, they're by choice or not by choice, they're forced due to lack of income, or forced to come back early after a workers' compensation claim to work. And they still have residual issues, problems, disabilities. It could be minor functional impairments or major, especially when we're talking about mental health issues. Rather than addressing these issues, it becomes, oh, this is a performance issue. It instantly goes into labor relations. We need to go into attendance management. I need to have a performance evaluation. Rather than taking that approach, which has been used for decades unsuccessfully and just results in a poisoning of the workplace, and getting workers through a temporary period in their lives to become more productive employees later on, we should use the approach of, hey, proactively, what are we going to do? We're going to identify the gaps that we have. What can you do? It's not what can't you do. What can you do? We're going to build and reassess the workplace around your abilities, not your disabilities. I find that approach works really well, because when you have the left column, right column, what can Tom do? What can't Tom do? What I can do will almost always be much greater than what I can't do. And then if you adjust the workplace job duties around that through a proper assessment, using medical evidence, non-medical evidence, getting all the necessary parties involved, the vast majority of the time, almost all the time, you can have a good outcome.
Thank you, Tom. And I just want to interject again to remind the panelists, if you have any questions, send them through the chat function. You guys have slid right into that second set of questions very comfortably there. For we're talking about employment life cycle now, and some of the challenges of organizations working with persons with disabilities over that continuity and advancement kind of process. And maybe some of you might want to touch on a little bit about how the standard can help address some of those challenges in order to formalize a work disability management system that supports continuity and advancement within the organization.
Hello everyone, it's Lina here. I do have a question that has come through just looking at inclusive workplaces. So I'll just read it out and then you can look at whether you'd like to answer it now or weave it into the next segment. The question's around focus groups. So how often do you use focus groups of people with disabilities to find out the real issues that other than people you work with? So I can read that again. How often do you use focus groups of people with disabilities to find out the real issues?
So that's a really great question. And I want to say that for the social research division, we are actually working on a project right now where we do consult people with disabilities, and we are asking them, what are their issues? What are the barriers? How do they identify accessibility issues within their environment? It's not a focus group, it's a Delphi panel, but it's still the same concept of asking the people with disabilities themselves what their needs are, and where they see the gaps and where they see the challenges.
At CUPE, what we have is a Persons with Disabilities Committee within British Columbia, and other provinces have similar types of committees where from all sectors, all age groups, all types of disabilities, persons who are differently abled, we gather that information as well. Hey, what is working? What isn't working? What are the challenges that we're facing? What things need to be made at a macro level and a micro level in the workplace, policy, with government, at the Workers' Compensation Board, et cetera.
In terms of advancement, getting your foot in the door and getting a position, and it usually means, and not always, but often means an entry-level position. And then the question becomes, well, how do I advance in my workplace? And often people with disabilities are overlooked for promotions. And I wonder, Tom, what percentage, I don't know if you can provide a percentage, but what, if you can, what percentage of your union complaints deal with retention issues and opportunities for career advancement?
I don't have specific numbers, but I do know for a fact that when a person has had either a long-term disability claim or a workers' compensation claim, or been off due to medium-term, different kinds of disabilities or just a lot of sick leave, that is factored into promotion and into the annual evaluation. I've seen a number of evaluations, a variety of different employers that comment on, well, Jane or John Doe was off X amount of time due to this disability. And while they don't fault the worker per se for having that, it does factor into their overall assessment, whether or not they're going to be suitable in another position, a lateral posting, or in a promotion. Without a doubt, it occurs, and it occurs regularly.
And how do you address that? And let me tag on to that. Do you think that the continuous improvement process within the standard can help address that?
First of all, in reverse order, I think the standard will go a long way towards addressing those kinds of issues. Second, the traditional approach of, well, I'm just going to file a grievance and go from there, that's a reactive approach. The standard is focusing on a proactive approach. How can we prevent these issues in the first place from occurring? And I think we need to get out of the mindset of, okay, I don't like my evaluation. It referred to the fact that I was off for 6 months due to a workers' compensation claim. I'm going to grieve it. The grievance may be resolved in 2 years. When you eventually go to arbitration, you may have an arbitration award for or against you. Too much time has gone by. It wrecks labor relations. It doesn't address the core issues that existed in the first place. So looking at the standard, okay, let's meet ahead of time. What are the issues that may arise out of this long-term disability claim, this workers' compensation claim? What restrictions and limitations and capabilities, more importantly, capabilities, this person may have and work around that. Being proactive is absolutely crucial. If you go down the road, the traditional approach of being reactive, you, by and large, the vast majority of the time, you're not going to have a good outcome.
And I imagine it consumes a lot of time for all kinds of people involved in that process. That's just time that gets burnt away, being defensive and reactive rather than really focusing on, well, how can we make this work as best it can? How can we tap into this person's talent and accommodate their needs as they recover from whatever health condition that they're struggling with?
There's something I think that you can also have to include in that, the whole question of continued education. And, if you want people with disabilities to have access to higher positions, you have to make sure that their qualifications evolve while they're in the company. Now, some companies do have, continued education programs to make sure that people are, and others don't. And the ones that we deal with anyway, what we've noticed is a lot of their programs aren't adapted to the person with disabilities. So he doesn't have access to the platforms that are going to enable him to have, to develop more skills, to give him access to promotions, to give him access to other positions. So it's like, it's for those that are qualified, there's one dimension, but for those who aren't qualified, but who can become qualified if we give them the right circumstance and put in I think it's important to look at the wider view. I mean, it's an investment in your employees. It's just like I was saying before, right? It's always a question of, you're investing time because the return is going to be worth the investment. So are people with disabilities having the same access to continued education, example, or they're being freed up to be able to take some type of programs at university so that they come back with that master's degree or whatever, so that they can have access to other positions? Or are they being limited? Because we look, one of the things we see, especially with people that are going back into the workforce after working an injury, or employers aren't established to take them back in, so they're going back into the same situation that made them sick in the first place, and then they're surprised that the situation reoccurs. As Tom was saying, where people are being reactive instead of proactive, but that takes time for people to take a look at their work environment and say, okay, is this the same work environment? Is this the type of work environment which will allow my employees to evolve and to progress? And so that's something that has to be addressed. I think there's something else too with the standard. What we see is that people in human resources who really want this to work, but when it gets down to frontline managers, that communication there is not there. Frontline manager still has the pressure to produce, and he's scared by bringing someone in with a disability. Well, who's going to take up the slack, to use their expression? And how long will we have to endure this before it starts to affect our production and our performance and our bonuses and whatever? So there's a prejudice there as well. And if that's the prejudice, how is that person with a disability, how is he going to become a frontline manager if the opening isn't there for him?
Tom, you actually raised some really good points. I want to go back to education for a minute. I want to circle back to that because I think that providing educational opportunities for employees can help them in career advancement, but it also provides them with a confidence and allows them to be in a stronger ground to negotiate raises or promotions for themselves. And I wonder, Joseph, if you help in your supported employment program, if you help negotiate those educational training resources for employees.
Well, the possibility is there, and we use different programs that exist that the government put in place so that it even reduces cost for employers. But it always comes down to does the person, the employee, want to get involved? And what we've noticed is that people are less open to get it because they also don't have the time and the energy. to going towards these education programs. And it's a little frustrating because you could see the potential and you could see that if you go, the return will be interesting, but they don't want to invest as well. So it's not only, it's sort of like, I'd like to see it used a lot more, but it's something that is used by very few.
We
Sadly.
have a question.
Yeah.
Function. I just thought I'd give a shout out to the person who sent a question related to education too, but a bit different angle. Okay, what educational strategies can be used with employers who view worker-centered accommodations as precedent setting, or raising concerns that collaborative accommodation identification sends the message that individuals are directing their own accommodation plan? I'll reread that quickly just to be sure we all get it. Okay, what educational strategies can be used with employers who view worker-centered accommodations as a precedent setting, or raising concerns that collaborative accommodation identification sends the message that individuals are directing their own accommodation plan? So really focus on that worker-centered approach.
That's a great question, and I think very clearly what has been shown in the evidence to work in terms of employment strategy or engagement strategies for employers is to have workers themselves provide that sensitization by allowing them to see what workers are capable of. So working alongside workers with disabilities, or having workers with disabilities provide educational sessions about what their specific disability means to them and how it manifests, or how it's managed within the workplace, and really working alongside the workers to create those type of educational opportunities. I don't know, Joseph or Tom, if you agree or if you have something to add to that.
I 100% agree, because the three biggest issues that I've seen for the last 22 years, it's an ongoing process, whether it's a full-on accommodation under human rights law, or just bringing back a person to work after a leave for a broken arm, could be anything. It's an ongoing process as opposed to a one-time event. There may be multiple meetings required over 6 months or a year or longer, especially with episodic or intermittent disabilities. Secondly, I find the initial assessment, hey, what do we need to do, is often lacking. It's, let's just get through this quick meeting. We'll be here for an hour, maybe an hour and a half, and then we're done. You may need a lot more in that. And thirdly, all parties, especially the worker, have to be involved as equal partners. The worker knows about what they're experiencing, their lived experience, what needs they may have, what kind of education they may require. So if you want to build up the workers' education, if you want to get them back to work, include them as an equal partner. I find a lot of times it's top-down driven. Well, we know best, you're just the worker, you're along for the ride. The worker can provide a lot of excellent insight and suggestions that could further the organization's goals.
Yeah, it reminds me of something that Mark Wafer once said at a presentation he was giving at one of our sessions. He's for those of you who don't know who he is, he owned a highly successful franchise of Tim Hortons donut workshop, Tim Hortons donut shops. I think in the Greater Toronto area, several of them, very, very successful. And he had this simple principle. He says, just ask the worker. They know what they need to be productive. Just talk with them and let them tell you what they need for in terms of accommodations to get the most out of their time and experience and talent.
There's one last question that's come through, just considering the time, and in the area of knowledge transfer. It reads the following: how well do knowledge transfer activities work in the context of disability management with frontline supervisors?
Repeat that.
Of course. How well do knowledge transfer activities work in the context of disability management with frontline supervisors?
It depends. I would say depends on the organizational culture and the individual that is working with that particular worker. But I think Tom was going to jump in and say something.
I think we're on the same wavelength there. It comes down to how much is the supervisor part of the process? Have they actually been trained and included all along? Hey, here's the new standard. We're including you in this. We're putting on a training webinar on this. Here are the key concepts, because you will be responsible for assisting the worker back in the workplace, as opposed to merely a tag along of, oh, we're bringing Jane or John Doe back in the workplace next week. You'll be expected to monitor their performance.
I'd like to weigh in on this.
Right.
I think that it's easier when you have a visible disability, but I work in mental health, right? And openly talking about mental illness is still a taboo in the workplace, even though things have gotten better. And most people with mental illness would rather not speak about it because they're scared of the stigmatization. They're scared of being put aside when it's time for promotions and whatnot. And at the same time, they'd rather that their colleagues don't know that they've had to put their knee down, because that stigma, that social stigma, is still there. And so it's like I could, you ask someone who's in a wheelchair about the accommodations he needs, it's much better received than someone who is got a who's living with bipolar illness and is struggling through day to day just to manage the stressors in his life so that he could perform at work. And so it's like, it comes back to individual needs. It comes back to the individual. But the fact is that the social, the stigma around certain types of disabilities, especially invisible disabilities, remain a factor that will keep people from talking about what type of accommodations they need in their workplace. I mean, I know we have clients here who don't even claim their medication on their company, programs, because they don't want the company to know what type of medication because they're scared that it'll come out and they'll lose their jobs. And that's still present. So yes, people getting involving the individual, yes, very important. But at the same time, people have to be open to what they're going to hear, even if they're not comfortable with it. They're going to have to open and say, yeah, I can adapt to that. And that, I think, is probably going to be the next challenge for us.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. And it really emphasizes the importance, as I think Pam started off talking about, culture change really being critical. We need to change the culture, being inclusive workplaces, realizing that there's differences across all of us, kind of thing, and accepting of those differences. Any last words? We have about a minute left before we close up. Anybody want to have the last word there?
I want to say that, Joseph, I completely understand, and we need to be realistic about what's possible in the workplace. And people with mental illness even though we like to say in the academic world, in the research world, that mental illness and physical illnesses are equal, they really aren't in the operation of things. So I think what could happen, it's not going to happen tomorrow, but in the future, what we could strive to do is universal design, because then people don't have to disclose their disability. Everybody will have the same access.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much. It's been a great discussion, guys. Thank you so much, Joseph, Pam, Tom. Just to close off, I want to mention to the people who have attended, several people have asked about how do we access the slides and the audio recording. We'll make that available on the CRWDP website. If you can't find the link, don't hesitate to write to us and we'll send you the link. We'll make it available as soon as we can upload it to the CRWDP website. So we have been recording it and these slides are available. Once again, thank you all panelists, Pam, Joseph, Tom, and Lina as well, for your introduction to the CSA group and the standards development process. Thank you all for attending, and we look forward to you joining us for future webinars, which are listed here on the current website. So we have a number of them focused on different topics in relation to this standard, and it's going on through till April. So lots of great information to gain from participating in subsequent presentations we'll be having to help us focus on different aspects of the standard, because this standard, as we mentioned, is very broadly scoped and offers a lot of possibilities across a number of issues around work disability management within organizations. So thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of the day. Take care and stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.